Okay, wonderful.
Got it.
So welcome, folks. Welcome to this little gathering circle here, discussion. And this is part of a series of online gatherings and circles and dialogues around some of the more pertinent themes that have arisen from our work through the Indigenous Creative Spaces Project, which we've been doing over the last couple of years. The main project was a traveling across the territory of Ontario, where we supported established spaces, Indigenous spaces, creative spaces, 6 of them, to recount their history and recount their story. Those were then called the legacy stories. So those are that was one process within the project, and the other stream was we went into 10 different communities, Indigenous communities that either had a creative space or did not, but wanted to talk about that and what that meant for where they were in that journey. And that was also a really wonderful process of sharing with artists, sharing knowledge, sharing information, sharing life experience. So this particular gathering, this particular circle is around bringing to you part of the development of Debajehmujig, which has a beautiful long history that they can share how they've come to this point over their journey. I'll let our presenters introduce themselves and turn the circle over to them. So Nyawa Goa, Miigwech, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Debaj.
I am Johanna Berti, the Director of Outreach and Education here at Debajehmujig. I've been here since 1993, and I'm here with my colleague, Sunny, David Osawabine. And I'll leave the rest to you, Sunny.
Hello, I'm David, Sunny Osawabine. Just going to share with you a little bit of the history of the Debaj here and its humble beginnings and stuff like that, and see how it goes. So anyways, the Debajehmujig Theatre Group was founded by Shirley Chicho and Blake Debosque in 1984, and that was down in Chiging. What was happening at that time was they felt the need for Native youth to be given an opportunity to see themselves and their lives reflected on the stage and in the characters and in the stories that they were telling, and to deal with some of the issues that were going on at that time. And I believe it started in their garage, where they would do script development, build shows, and do rehearsals and stuff like that. And at that time, the performances were done in the school auditorium out in Chiging. But then down in 1989, Debajehmujig was handed over to Larry Lewis, and he was an actor for stage and film during the 70s and 80s, and he went on to directing. And Larry, with the help of Audrey Osawabine, they then moved into a little house out on Lakeshore Drive in Chiging. And later that year, they moved into the old nursery school in Wikwemekong, where they would do script development, build shows and rehearsals. Performances at that time were done in my father's backyard, which was basically in the bush. So they had to do a lot of clearing out of the land there in order to do these performances there. And they also did performances down at the Holy Cross Mission Ruins in Wikwemekong. Not too long after that, the Debaj became a touring company, and thanks to Audrey, who was our tour coordinator at the time, and she later became our community liaison, we toured all across Canada and the US. And during this period of time, the old nursery school was condemned, and the Debaj ended up in a little trailer that used to be an old nursing station behind the nursery school, and this is still our head office to this day. But not really having any place to call home, we did a lot of our script developments, rehearsals, and builds and stuff like that in the basements of people's houses and in church basements. And eventually we ended up in the old funeral home in Manitowoc, and we stayed there for about 3 years. And during this time, what happened was Rene Maston, he offered us the old Maston's General Store as a home base, because what he wanted to do was he wanted to honor the connection between Wikwemekong and Manitowoc that his folks established over decades and decades, because they had the old general store. A lot of people from Wiki would come and do their shopping here. We had like they had like a grocery area, they had a clothing section. Back in the olden times, they even had a horse feeding section out in the back there. It's been around for a long time, this building, eh? But anyways, at that time, we began the work of gutting and renovating the building. And while it was still a shell, probably, I think this might have been around 2004, 2005, maybe. We moved into what is now the Larry E. Lewis studio part of the building in the fall. And this is where we started doing rehearsals and stuff like that. And it was still just basically, it was just the, how would you say it? Just a shell of the building, I guess. And we used to use heaters to heat up the building, like little area heaters. We had a whole bunch of those set out and try to keep ourselves warm because we were getting ready to do a show to go on tour. And I believe that was New World Brave, and we toured with that show down to all over Canada and the United States. And then after that, some time went by, and we finally got to move into the Debajehmujig Creation Center as it is now, and that was in 2008. But during that period of time, between then and 2008, we had to move in and out because they were doing the renovations and stuff like that. So a lot of the times we would be in here for maybe a bit of the summer where we'd be getting ready for shows, maybe a bit of the fall where we're getting ready to tour. And then we would be out of the building for the rest of the time up until they kicked us out for good because they had to finish all the hard work of getting everything put together for us and get all the renovations completed. And that's where we are today. And some of the, just trying to go on the topics that we were given here, a lot of our work was done outdoors, but we needed to establish a place where we could do indoors because we wanted to move into winter productions where we weren't touring, because touring became a little less touring and more done at home type of deals. So we needed a building, and this is when we moved in here and we started doing our winter shows. So now we do shows in the winter and we do shows in the summer. Usually, or I don't know if I could say usually, but previously our outdoor shows were done at the ruins. We didn't have done this for many, many years, but then we were told we weren't allowed to go into the ruins anymore. So now we do our summer main stages here in the facility here, and we also do our winter shows in here. Some of the things that we would like to see starting to happen here, though, which is going to be quite a while before this happens, I think, is it would be good to get our equipment upgraded, like get into the more modern LED lighting and stuff like that. And just to help with our production values and also make things a lot easier, because it's kind of hard sometimes, like going up and down, changing gels and hanging lights and everything like that. So it would be good to get these new LEDs that have color changers so I won't have to climb scaffolds all the time. And that would be a good thing to do. And hopefully that'll happen sometime in the near future. And some of the other stuff that we do here, we do a lot of teaching. Like when we get a group of students, this is where it comes into the relationship between land and the territory that we're on in the water. When we get a new batch of students, it usually starts out with me and Ashley. What we do is we take them out onto the land and we do land-based stuff out there. We do go through a lot of teachings, and we would do this for a period of 2 weeks. And at the end of that 2 weeks, they would come into the Debajehmujig Creation Center where they would start getting into improv training and all that fun stuff. But it usually starts with me and Ashley. And we do a lot of things. We go out to the water. We go out to various parts of the bush in Quamacong here and out in South Bay. So we take them on little field trips. And we get them to start focusing on teaching and try to bring them into, how would you say that? Ground them, get them grounded real good into teachings, get them grounded into themselves, becoming aware of themselves and all that nifty stuff. And so with that, where this all started out with getting into the land-based things was back in 2008. Alicia Sidler was working with us here at the Debajehmujig, and she started this thing called Thrive. And the reason Thrive happened was because I was going through what we call our foundational teachings. And one of those teachings is what we call the Legend of the Four Axes, which is basically everybody should know how to plant, build, harvest, and hunt. So when she heard that, this idea started growing up in her mind about how she can kind of bring that to life and put it into a show form. So what she did was she started this thing called Thrive, and she had a group of students with her, and we went through those teachings numerous times, and then she started developing a show out of that. And this show took place at 83 Wellington outside in our garden. We started a garden at this point as well, eh? So this is when all our gardening and all that nifty food growing stuff started happening. And that went on, and not too long after that, actually 1 year after that, we began what became known as the 6 Foot Festival, which we do every year. And I believe this year was this upcoming year is going to be our 14th annual 6 Foot Festival. So we've been doing this for quite a while. Like when we first get those students and take them out to the bush, the first place we start is in the garden. And we go through the teachings there, and then once we get all the gardening stuff done, all the seeds in the ground and everything, then we take them out to the real bush. So that started happening, and we do the 6 foot every year, and it's always a different theme. We try to have a different theme every year. And then we also, out of that, came the seed exchange. And we've been doing that for a number of years as well. Now, getting into some of the other stuff here, we started, and I'm not too sure where this relates to within these things. I think it might have to do with the cultural part of this, I guess you can say, maybe even a little bit of the sovereignty part, is we got into the doing the foundation teachings on Zoom. This was a result of COVID. When COVID hit over here, a lot of people were in lockdown, and so were we, and we couldn't get out and do anything. So what had started happening at that point was my wife came up to me and she said, "Hey, Sonny, why don't you start tooting your flute on Facebook or something, just so people will have something to watch." So I started doing that. And also at this time, Ashley started doing little podcasts and things. And that was pretty neat. And this went on for several months. And then my wife got this brilliant idea, because COVID was carrying on for a long time. And she came up with this idea that maybe we should try doing the foundation teachings on Zoom. So what happened then was I had to get in touch with all of the Osawabine and Wiki here, and I had to consult with them to see if I would be able to do this online. So the way this came about was Christine offered me tobacco and asked me to she requested I do these teachings online. So I got in touch with all of the Osawabine, and then at that time, I asked them to hit record on the Zoom sessions. So they hit record and nothing happened. And I said, "What happened?" They said, "Well, nothing. We can't, it says we got to get permission." And I said, "Okay, so do you think it's a good idea that I do these teachings on Zoom so that they can't be recorded and stuff?" And they said, "Yeah, sure, do it." And so that's how that came about. And we've been doing that, I think, for probably since the latter part of 2019, early 2020. I think it was actually June or July 2020 when we started doing that. And that carried on right up until just this March, because now that we're back full time at the Bodge, we don't have as much time to focus on that, doing the teachings, because we're so busy getting focused on works and shows coming up and all that neat stuff. But I had to get consensus in order to do that. And that's how that came into being. And anybody got any questions or thoughts or anything they would like to ask? Because I know that was quite a little chunk of information in a real brief period of time.
I'd love to hear about your experience of when you take these students, when they first come and you take them out onto the land and into the bush. What happens to them? How do they respond? What have you experienced of that? Because to me, that's such an amazing way to bring them into the process. You start on the land and with the water.
Okay, so what happens there is we go through like the entire foundation presentation takes about 2 hours, usually a little bit more depending on how fast I go. But it's usually about 2 hours. So the first thing in the garden is we go through the entire process. We go through the entire foundation presentation. And then we let it sit with them for a little while so they could soak this in and start to think about things differently, I guess you can say. Eh? Once that's done, once we're done our time in the garden, then we take them out onto the land, and then we'll go through the teachings in a little bit more detail. And then what we'll do is we'll get them to go find a spot where they can sit, and that could be down by the water or out in the bush or wherever they want to be. And we give them a focus. We give them one of the teachings to focus on, and we give them about a half an hour to think about that. And then at the end of that half hour, they'll come back and we'll just have a little discussion and see how things were for them, what thoughts were going through their mind, things like that. And then we'll give them another teaching to focus on and send them out again. And usually by this time, because sometimes it takes us a couple of hours to get out into the bush, and sometimes that would be the end of our days, just getting through maybe 2 teachings. But we do this for 2 weeks. So we take them out to a different spot the next time, and then we'll take them out to a different spot and go through the same process using different teachings though. And then it's all about getting themselves grounded, getting them to be aware of themselves as individuals, who they are, who they truly are as individuals. So we go through all of that, and they usually come out and they love going out in the bush. I mean, it's just a real great time out there. We'll also do cookouts out there as well. So we'll start a fire. We'll get them to start fire without using matches or lighters and things like that. And then we'll cook up some fish or whatever food we happen to have. And that changes from day to day. So it's a good experience for the students. And then what we do after that is when we start getting into the build of a production, we'll usually go through the foundation again, and then we'll kind of build based off of those teachings, not necessarily using the teachings like verbatim and stuff like that, but just it's the base of what we build, if that makes sense. Because the teachings are not to be recorded. It's all oral histories.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention too that our future aspiration is also that 2-week period, we come and go and people go home every night. It's to have a fully immersive experience on the land. So we're literally out there, probably not for 2 weeks, but we'd be out there for maybe up to a week of having that opportunity to be introduced to the teachings, reflect on how we relate to them, but then also reflect in a really natural environment in terms of natural connection, so that we can really facilitate that deeper understanding of that worldview and each individual person's understanding of it and connection to it, because that's the foundation of our art and creation practice. So that's one of our hopes for the future, is we can do it more and do it for longer, because the impact on the students is profound. And I think what we do right now, Sunny's talking about the very beginning of the training, but over the course of a training year, there's 4 discrete times that they go back to the teachings so that they can see how their understanding of them is developing, but also so they can see how they are developing with respect to them. So we're right now, we're taking about a week 4 times a year for them to make that connection over the course of a 3-year program. So we're still very much growing it. And we're going to be working with Christine Friday, who also has her own process out on the land and in the water. And we just started working together with our first pilot project last fall. And she came to us and we wandered around here, but we also did a lot of physical work and self-care work. And the end of this upcoming summer, we're going to be going as a group to go out on the land with her for a week and stay out there the whole time. And hopefully we'll have at least 1 or 2 of our own elders plus elders from her community and our students and a few of us main folks that will go out to have that experience together to really deepen that relationship, but also deepen our understanding of how it supports our art practice. So that's some of our future aspiration with the land, water, and territory part.
And will you do that where she is by Bear Island, or will you do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think her family area is on Lake Temagami. It's in and around that area. So we'll probably meet at Bear Island, but then we're going to end up going out into her family's sort of traditional territory. And we'll learn about that, and we'll learn about her family, and And I think there's even somebody in her community that knows a lot about the stars and star teachings, which we don't talk about so much down here. So we'll get a bit of an introduction to that, and have our own chance to kind of gaze up at the sky and see what's there and see what connections we can make. So it's really that's really exciting for us, because it expands every time we do something. It grows and becomes more sort of rooted and embedded in our practice every time we go.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. We're not necessarily at the point of asking what type of change or impact it has for an individual, because I think they need to sit with it for a while. The other part is, I think, in terms of just reflecting on some of the impacts that we've had, or some of the alumni that we've had who have been immersed in some of our teachings or our practices, have gone on to be in some pretty significant roles in the community. So I think in terms of having that identity based and that connection, I think is really foundational, not just for arts practices and that storytelling, but for the work that people are doing outside of that practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Beautiful.
And just on another note here, we're kind of hoping that sometime in the very near future we'll be able to get back into the ruins in Wiki. And a lot of the times what happens there is, like, even like when we do our set buildings and all that nifty stuff there, we tend to try to the best of our ability to grab stuff that's already on the land. So we do a lot of recycling and repurposing. And that's how we would build a lot of our sets and things like that. And we go out in the bush, find things. Like there was one show where we built a bunch of wigwams, and there's another show where we had a fire and we cooked tea and stuff like that, gave it out to the audience. And it's a lot of fun doing things like that. But yeah, we try to repurpose as much as we can, which we do quite a lot.
Yeah. And the original reason why we started performing in the ruins, the Holy Cross Mission ruins, is was back in 1994 when we did the first Manitoulin Incident show. This was a show about the community, and I think it was the first time that we had moved out of Sonny's dad's property, and we were looking for a more enclosed space. And in exchange for using the ruins as a performance venue for ourselves during the summer, we agreed that we would animate and perform during the Easter service the 12 Stations of the Cross. So this is in our company lovingly referred to as the Jesus Show. And we're still doing this, like even during the COVID era. We found a way to be able to put it together and do it online. So, and I think at that time you couldn't even just go to regular church services because of gatherings and everything like that. So we found a way to digitize it, complete with a voiceover from a former alumni living in another city. And that got us through the pandemic. And this year we went back live for the very first time in that 3-year period to go back into the go back into the church and actually do the performance. So we're kind of realigned now to be able to reuse the ruins as our performance venue in the summer. And I think I just want to mention that we have been recently going through a series of staff interviews just to check in on people, see where they're at, what they want in the future, how they feel about where they've been, what they've accomplished for themselves within that. And one of the things that surprised me was the number of staff who came in and said, I'd really like to be back performing outside. There's really something about performing outside that means more to me than all the bells and whistles inside the fanciest studio. I think I came away from that series of interviews that I sat in on with Lynda and realized it is its own thing. This is not about summer festival theater and things that are good for kids with popcorn on the side. This is really its own thing. And we've seen the profound impact of it when we've had elders that come and see our show that and maybe part English, part Ojibwe, or all in the language, where you can see their response to it is really powerful. And sometimes some of them are in tears because oh, this makes me emotional, because they're hearing their own language in their own territory and their own story after a life of not having that option or opportunity. And it's really powerful for us to see that. And it does translate very differently in the studio, where the audiences are still coming and they're still moved by the shows. But the alignment with the land and the alignment with the lifeway is much more powerful outdoors than it is indoors. So we are looking forward to our next opportunity actually to have at least some of our summer schedule happening in the community. It's also easier for people to get to because there's no public transportation here. So you can usually get most places in Wiki, but that extra drive down the road to get to town usually takes a bit more coordination. So we're not quite seeing our same beloved long-standing audience that we have. And we're looking forward to seeing how we can just reintroduce ourselves back into the community in that way again as well. We still do a lot of workshops and stuff. Sorry,
yeah,
Lynda?
sorry. Just to follow up with that, it's just, I don't know if it was shared that the ruins that right now have a structural integrity. And so there is an engineering assessment that occurred last week to determine whether it's what the plan moving forward may be. The community has asked us about considering developing our performance for use of the ruins should it be safe for the summer. Unfortunately, with that type of instability on what the future holds, that's not an option for us at the moment. But thankfully and luckily, they still include us in conversations regarding the ruins so that we can, we can plan accordingly, but also we can figure out where it is that we can be a partner in trying to, address some of the concerns, but also put on the table our concerns. There is no lighting immediately outside the room, so it could be kind of dangerous. Mm-hmm. There is no washroom right outside the room, so if there's some facilities for people to utilize, but also like what's the care and maintenance of it, and it's not always accessible either. So if we can put those kind of items on the table and make sure that people who are coming to visit it still make reference to the history for the community, then I think we would be a good partner with that, just making sure that it's safe for people as well. That's based on our experience, but also maintaining that relationship with the community, that we are still part of the discussions, and also that they're listening to us as well and soliciting some feedback on our experiences. So that we're hopeful that things can be addressed quite quickly, but at the same time, it's up in the air because it is a former residential school site, so I don't know what's going to happen. But on the alternative, Wacomico is recognizes the need for us to continue to do the work that we do within the community and in outdoors. What are some of the alternatives that we can discuss if the rooms aren't going to be available for anything longer than what we've already experienced, so that we don't have that disruption for our own work, but also their local economy as well.
I'm glad this conversation kind of went there, because I've always been fascinated with the choice of performing at the ruins, and how that came about, and the continuation of it emotionally even. And so could you share a little bit about how the ruins became kind of the place for performance, and how that still sits within community?
Before the more experienced ones start, what I will say though is the history of the ruins is that it was built by people from Wikwemkong. So there's not a lot of hate or animosity in terms of what it represents, or that relationship with the Catholic Church or even the Jesuits. It was built by our own community. So I'm going to preface any further conversation with that component. so that people understand that there's a lot of support and a lot of love for that
Yes.
building and the location. Yes.
Mhm. And the reason why we started to perform there was in 1994, Alanis King wrote a play called The Manitoulin Incident. And it was actually a play about an incident that happened within the community when the British first came here. The French Jesuits had already been here and had established themselves in the community in quite a congenial relationship. As Lynda said, like when the Jesuits first came, they learned the language. They started to come to an understanding of working with the people. They introduced agricultural practices. Like there's a lot of hybrid fruit trees and things like that that were originally seeded by the Jesuits that came. And the British came in one day right into Wikwemikong Bay. And all of the families in Wikwemikong stood with the church at the top of this huge bluff, and basically pushed the British out. Like they didn't have a place to land. They didn't have a way to come into the community and take over. So telling the story at the ruins was actually telling it at the very site of this showdown between the community and the Jesuits that were helping them at the time, and the British that were trying to sort of come in and take over the territory. So so it was really important to Alanis, who was our artistic director at that time, as well as the playwright, to be able to go back to that very site where the incident happened to be able to perform the play. So that was when we made the arrangement with the Holy Cross Mission that we would continue to be able to perform our plays in the summer, because everybody was really happy with the results, including the community members who had a really strong attachment to the story, but also were the descendants of the very family members that had lugged the stone up this hill to build the building. I mean, if you've been to Wikwemikong, you'll see it's at the top of a really high bluff. And somewhere in the history, might even be in the church somewhere, there's the names of all of the families that worked together, fathers, sons, everybody together, creating that piece of infrastructure so that the children could be educated within that kind of a structure. And it was the beginning, as Lynda has said, of a very different relationship and a different kind of residential school than a lot of the kind of horror stories that we're hearing about and are getting uncovered now. So we're not dealing with quite the same residential school legacy as some other communities are, although our compassion and understanding for their journey is profound. And I'm just wondering, should I start talking about the individual and organizational sovereignty? Do I just slide right into that?
I just had one more question, and Sunny, you mentioned it earlier about the Thrive program and the base of that, learning those survival skills, being self-reliant. How is that woven into the whole process that you just shared with us?
Well, basically now in these modern times now, we still do the garden except for the past few COVID years, but we do the garden every year. And that's the garden, like when we have people come over and visit us, we'll feed them things that we've grown. So they have the food that we've actually grown. We give them lunches and things like that. And we keep doing that. And sometimes we'll go out and forage things, like sometimes we might bring in maybe some deer meat, or might bring in some leeks or things like that. I mean, like now's the season to pick the leeks, and the good little mushrooms are coming out now. So we forage a little bit as well. And that's also a part of what we do when we take the people out on the land, is we'll take them through various types of medicines and things like that, foods. So they have a little idea of, and it's just a little snippet, because it would take a long time to go through all of that. But we give them snippets of stuff and say, here, try this out. What do you think of that? You can eat this, you can eat that. This is good for this, this is good for that. So we'll give them a little bit of an idea about the medicinal values. And that's getting backgrounded into our connection to the land, basically, and how it takes care of us. Because everything we get comes from the land. But yeah, it started with the Thrive, and Alicia starting the garden there, and then they had their little show out there. We've been keeping the garden ever since. And we actually have people starting to do their own home gardens because of this, so they would get their little raised beds at home, things like that. We have basically, I guess you could say we have two places where we do major gardening. That would be the 83 Wellington, and then over at Ashley's house.
Mhm.
He's got a big garden there that we all go help out with.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah,
I guess
yeah, it's had a huge impact actually on us as a group. When we started to grow and then cook our own food, just because we were at the same time being asked to do a lot of custom shows about really prevalent health issues like diabetes in our community.
Okay.
And we were finding that, especially with our new students coming in, for a whole bunch of various reasons, they didn't have great knowledge or understanding of nutrition or its impact on their body. So we were also looking for some practical ways to help them as artists to keep themselves in shape, feel well, have stamina, be able to work to the optimum level. But in order to really have them doing that, we had to sort of find a gentle way to introduce that, you know, if you eat pop and chips every day, or if you got French fries with every meal that you eat or whatever, it really slows you down and it's really hard on your body in a variety of ways. And one of our original photographers, Josh Peltier's dad, came in to help us with that show because he was actually really suffering from diabetes. And our whole show was a multimedia performance of having dinner with Josh's dad. And it was a group of our artists talking about it and him talking about the disease. And after that, our interest and our desire to cook the food that we grew and share it and everything else really went through the roof, because those connections between the land, the food, and putting it inside of us and our overall well-being were starting to get really strong, and they still are to this day. So we have two festivals actually that celebrate this land-based work. One is in the fall, the 6 Foot Festival, and that developed directly out of Thrive, and it's a celebration of land, food, and art. And the food is about cooking the food that we've grown and sharing that at a community feast, and it's free. It's just to be shared. It's not to make money or charge people or anything like that. And at the 6 Foot Festival, there's different presentations that are made about land-based knowledge, work, growing, harvesting. And that's kind of everything from traditional wild rice harvesting to, you know, how to cook and preserve a squash or a barrel of apples or something like that. So some of it's really practical, but it always connects back into our relationship with it and the well-being that it can possibly give us. And we also do an annual seed exchange every spring towards the end of February, because our first flirtation with sovereignty was seed sovereignty. This is just a great way to understand stuff. Where we started through the early years understanding the impact of genetically modified seeds and everything that that is doing to our land here on the island, but also around the world. That sort of gave us the impetus to not only do it ourselves, but also start sharing with the public. If you've got heritage seeds and that kind of thing, here's what you do to keep them so you can use them year after year. If you're just starting out, this is how you do seed saving. This is the process of it. These are the practical steps. Here's how you store them. It's getting really popular now. When we started doing this, nobody was doing it. Now there's seed exchanges in 3 or 4 different places on Manitoulin Island. There's harvest festivals and hunting festivals in the fall, but none of this was going on when we first started the 6 Foot Festival or the first seed exchange, where now we have people coming from all over the region and they bring seeds and they exchange them for the seeds that we have, and everything is heritage and heirloom stuff. None of it is GMO stuff. So we're starting to see, even in a small way locally, like we're able to really raise awareness and also have an impact on the health of the land itself. It's a lot of farms here on Manitoulin and beyond the First Nation communities. And there have been some pretty innovative farming practices here through the years. One of the things that both the Seed Exchange and 6 Foot did was it brought Indigenous knowledge keepers and people with land-based knowledge together with non-Indigenous people that have been growing and looking after their land in various ways. So for several years, it was like a fantastic sharing and a deepening of our understanding, and also an expansion of those practices themselves as we learned and other people learned and the public learned. it started to really take hold here. So now we're finding that Sunny and Ashley, who started those two festivals and programs, they're starting to be invited out into the region to talk about their experience and to bring seeds and share seeds and do what our outreach program did like 30 years ago, go into different communities, sharing and starting to get people excited about doing some new things and helping them get started. So it's really interesting to see how those things develop in such an organic way, a really relationship-based way, I guess, is how we understand it.
It seems very empowering. What it feels like to me, it feels very empowering and very holistic as well.
Yeah, even with that, like Ashley, Charity, and myself, we just came back last week. We were out in North Bay, and they did their first seed start, I guess you can call it. They're just starting to get into the seed exchange type of deal there. So what we did there is we went and did a presentation. I did the foundation teachings presentation. And then not too long after that, Ashley did his little presentation about seed and how we incorporate those teachings into the seeding and into growing. Because basically when you grab a seed, that's really, it's a little piece of life that you're putting into the ground. So we have to nurture these things just like you would with a child and bring them up into fruition and that neat stuff.
You're right, though. It is really, really empowering, and it's very aligned with the sort of progress of Debajehmujig, where we're here on Manitoulin Island without a ton of access to a lot of stuff that our colleagues in urban centers can kind of just walk around the corner and get. So I learned like very early in my first couple of weeks at Debajehmujig, it's like, this is the most amazing company in the world, because it never occurs to them that they can't do anything. And anything that we need is made. It's made in the community, and it's made by somebody that we know. So we're performing outside, but we need an electrical outlet. So we call the guy at the band office, and, you know, in some appointed time, he goes up and does that. But everything was very within the community. We needed a boat, the guys would build it. We needed something that moved, they would build it. So it's very much part of the company's culture. Yeah, to make what we need and use it again and again. And that's been true since the very earliest of times at Debajehmujig, Sunny.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're always trying to recycle and repurpose.
And reuse.
You know, it's already 10 to 2, so you better get cracking on the other thing.
Better get going.
Unless you guys want to go into later time, it's fine by me.
I know now I was sitting here worried that we weren't going to have enough to stay, and now I'm going, where should I start? I was actually going to address our individual organizational Indigenous sovereignty, and then a little bit about systemic barriers. I think that's been experienced by all of us, so there's not a whole ton to say. But the process of individual and organizational sovereignty, and to some degree, Sunny has alluded to the way we manage digital sovereignty. It's nothing to be recorded, and we don't do anything without the consensus of the O'Dowd Medewin, so that we're in part of, we're aligned with the teachings on which we're founded, and we're learning as we go how to bring this work into modern times in a way that respects the protocols within the teachings. And it's not hugely complicated. Sometimes it just takes a bit more time. But the organizational decolonization or indigenization, as well as the individual, I was noticing in the sector starting a few years ago, it got really popular to talk about decolonizing your thinking, and you could go to decolonizing workshops, and it was being talked about a lot. And one of my colleagues that some folks might know, she's in Toronto now, Sarah Rock, she said, you know, you really can't decolonize unless you indigenize at the same time. And I stopped and thought about that. It's like, yeah, we all live inside this colonial paradigm in Canada, and most of us do it without any awareness at all because we don't know something different. But in Indigenous communities, certainly an entirely different life way is known, and it's always struggling below the surface to burst forward, and it wants to come forward. But without all of the foundational pieces in place, It's really challenging to do that. And I try to imagine what our urban colleagues must go through trying to decolonize their thinking and indigenize their practice in a context where it's not supported by anything that's around you. Whereas in our context, we're supported by and surrounded by knowledge keepers, language speakers, elders, people that can really guide us forward, but also give us real insight into how things are supposed to be grounded, the order they're supposed to be in, why they are in that order, which has really helped us. So organizationally, I think because we're on Manitoulin Island and we're in a community that's fully integrated into our practice, we've always had a level of organizational sovereignty because we haven't been right downtown Toronto where everybody can see you and you're being compared to everybody else. We're the only theater company and multi-art organization on the island currently that operates this way. And a lot of times, because we're so far away from the main centers where everything happened, we did have the opportunity to come up with our own solutions to the challenges we were facing. And funders didn't have a problem with it because it wasn't impinging on anything that was their focus. So it did give us a little more freedom than our colleagues in urban centers have had the opportunity to have. And we were always guided by sort of the foundations of the company itself, which is the path forward will always include what's best for us. So if we as a group can come together and decide what is a logical next step, and we all agree to it, we can figure out how to do it, and we can take that step. Again, because we're not in a larger arts community of people that are doing things in a certain way or trying things in a new way. So in one way, the isolation is a bit of a shortfall. You don't have as many people coming to see your shows. Your roster of bums in seats doesn't look as good in your reporting at the end of the year. But the freedom that it's given us to include more Indigenous practice in our regular operations has been really important. And that's continuing to expand, particularly under Lynda's leadership, where she's moving us forward, particularly as it relates to sovereignty. And within the whole group, there's a good, strong general understanding and a good connection to the identity of the organization. But as we continue on this path, and we continue being based on the teachings, the more challenging part of it was also to recognize that each individual needed to engage in that process for themselves. And we're well supported by our elders and knowledge keepers and having Sunny with us on staff and that to help us continue with that work. But I'm just going to read from my notes. But we came to understand that it wasn't actually a group exercise. It was up to each individual to identify how the spiral of development was interrupted and what each one needed to do to rectify those broken connections within themselves. Everyone had their own organic pace, had their own specific experiences and resistances that they had to come to terms with to begin to understand their personal sovereignty. With this understanding of personal sovereignty also comes great responsibility for ourselves in our own time and for those who came before us that came as far as they could so that we could have a solid platform to grow on. And this is constantly reinforced by Sunny in the teachings that we look forward first, and then we look to the past, and then we look at where we are now. So we had to understand that the generations before us within the system, so that was Shirley and her original colleagues, followed by Larry and his original colleagues, they all developed and advanced as best they could within the confines of what was being offered. And that was really complicated because everybody had to keep on relating to these external criteria and standards that were not only foreign in terms of the art making, but were also foreign in terms of the environment in which we operate. We still had to try to make sense of that, show that we were achieving a standard of excellence, that we were relevant, that we were still viable and all of those kinds of things. And those were the challenges that they faced that softened a bit by the time I came along in the early 90s. So the personal sovereignty piece really challenged us to operate from those Indigenous values. We had to be compassionate and patient with each other as each one of us started to come to terms with our own understanding And we had to find a way to enable the organic nature of Indigenous perceptions and lifeways within a social context and sector that misconstrued everything from the way we used our time and funding to the outcomes we were able to achieve because of that understanding. And this meant respecting time for fasting, ceremony, language acquisition, personal reflection, and the gaining of wisdom, because our arts sector does not provide for this in the timelines and the fundings that they offer. We still had to find a way to accommodate it if we really wanted to be who we said we were, grounded on the teachings that we say we're grounded on. And I started to think of colonization was a bit like a slow poisoning. You take in a little bit, and at first your body habituates, it maintains equilibrium. You take on a little more, and your body still habituates, and it adjusts and it maintains equilibrium, which is why colonization or decolonizing your thinking is complicated, because it's within us as well as outside of us. We think of it as an outside thing that we have to sort of fight, and we do, but there's also all of the internalized learning and the outcomes of that that we also have to undo in order for those things to be aligned for us to be able to see clearly. So different members of the company had to sort of contend with different amounts of poison, and the getting it out of you is as varied as the individuals who engaged in the process. So we worked with elders, knowledge keepers, and language speakers. And in this way, we've been really, really blessed, because the community of Wikwemikong has many members who have knowledge and wisdom to guide us, but nothing mitigated the individual work of coming to the understanding and a grounded way of being. So even though in some ways we felt like we were swimming upstream, we were also taking the only pathway that made sense based on who we are and where we are. And the reason we could do this was greatly enhanced by the environment in which we're in, connecting to our community and on the land where our ancestors grew, lived, and passed away. We're not in a densely urban area full of comparisons and distractions and a constant move to water down our perceptions and assimilate them somehow into a ubiquitous and somewhat empty whole. So the little bit of funding that we get is a little bit of the downside, but there are so many other resources from our perspective to be able to balance it out, that our location has maintained, or we maintain that it's a huge resource for us, and we're really grateful to be able to continue to practice here. In rural areas, there's been some effort made to make art accessible to everyone, because we know it changes hearts and minds, and it provides immediate insight into lived experience, as well as enriching the quality of life for everyone. So there's a general understanding and a little bit of funding. Our creative impetus has been to use the resources that we have to do the things that make sense to the people around us. So working outside, working a lot with community youth, outdoor, in community organizations, in schools and things like that is still a really large part of our practice, because we were taught by our elders that part of the reason why they were sharing with us was so that we would be able to reach more people than would ever have the opportunity to come to them. It's just keeping the knowledge alive means passing it on and making sure that people are applying it and using it. So we're doing our very best with that. The organizational piece, as I said, it sort of came first, and it was almost easier, although it wasn't. It was almost easier. What we started to understand was something that comes directly from our teachings, which kept pointing us back to ourselves individually. But it wasn't until after we moved into this space in 2008 that the stress on each person to come to this group understanding was really starting to impinge on the well-being of the group as a whole, because we hadn't been able to make enough space for that personal work that each person needed to do. And there's nothing in the framework that actually encourages or even makes space for that. So it's a piece that we've had to figure out on our own. And
you mean nothing in the, you mean, I'm sorry, you mean nothing in the mainstream framework?
Nothing in the mainstream framework, but even when it comes to when you're working inside the Aboriginal sector, you're still dealing with the same timelines and funding limitations. So putting somebody on subsistence for 6 weeks so they can be on the land with their elder, it's starting to become possible now. It would have seemed like a ridiculous suggestion, maybe even 5 years ago. So the
Mhm.
change that's happening now is really quite rapid, but it's also important for people that haven't been working in the sector for a long time to understand that it was an intractable, immovable scarcity that all of our previous colleagues worked in for the 40 years prior to us.
Mhm.
So it has been easier for us than the generation before, but everything in the Indigenous sector has undoubtedly been hard won for everybody.
Mhm.
So coming into a time now where we want to work collaboratively and much more collectively, swimming against the tide of you're going to compete, you're going to look better than your neighbor and all of that kind of thing, to have the chance to do that now is a real and quite new opportunity that's really exciting and validating for us. And part of the challenge for us was when we began the international touring, that's when we could really see the strain being visible within our group. And some of that was just recognizing when you go over to Europe, you're in the sort of the home of where mainstream art came from. And what we were unprepared for was being recognized as a commodity. Like one of our colleagues, Bruce, we're in downtown Glasgow. We're really excited to be there. We're there for the first time. And we're greeted in the city where we were performing with a collaborating company with life-sized cardboard cutouts of Bruce in his regalia as one of the global savages all over the community. We were not ready for that level of commodification, even though you sort of think you are. You know, we'd worked in urban centers in Canada and the States and everything. That's when we started to realize, oh, we have to look after the individuals because each individual adds up to the whole. And that's 201. Should I stop? So we've been heavily engaged in that work, working directly with Sunny as our company elder, but also being given the space to work with individual elders to take that time and to take responsibility for taking that time so that we can continue to grow in a stronger, grounded, and empowering way. And I think it's to make sure that there's an authenticity and a sincerity that we bring to our work in the same way that we're asked to bring to our ceremonies.
Mhm.
And I had a little bit to say about systemic barriers, but I feel like that's the thing that we all know the most about. So JP, I'm happy to answer questions around specific things that people might want to know about, but I also realize this is our time.
Mhm. Well, yeah, maybe we could take a couple of questions on, I don't know if there's anything there in the chat that people are asking. Tatiana, do you see anything in there? I'm sure if you've been monitoring that.
Yeah, not so much questions, more just people popping in to speak about experiences that they've had at Debaj and thanking you both for the conversation, but no questions.
Okay.
Well, I think it's really, truly amazing, revolutionary how you're making space for each person's journey within that space, as well as the organization's ability to listen, to not say, you know, we're the experts, we know what we're doing, we're just going to go for, you know, no, it's those years of listening that that is just incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're well supported in that. I can't say enough about that. There's only two of us here, but we're a larger company and we're from a much larger community that really is the container for us, the basket that keeps us well and keeps us going.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Terry Lynn, do you want to say anything in the ending of this? Incredible sharing.
Yeah, other than that, yeah, it was fabulous to relive our in brief, our visit that we had there 3 years ago now.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was, as you were sharing, I was just remembering so much of that conversation that we had in person 3 years ago, and the depth of all of that, and the visit throughout the space in
the cultural center now. So it's great. I thank you both so much for filling in kind of last minute, which is awesome. And for sharing so much. I mean, Debaj has got such a rooted history, and we all can learn so much from its evolution and the journey it's still on. So it's important that you were here today and to share as part of this overall ArtsBuild program and series, and continue to be part of. So now I'll go to you both. Thank you, Jimigwej, for your support and your conversation today, and for sharing. Yeah.
Miigwech, for your generosity and sharing your journey. Very, very much appreciated.
Miigwech.